What's cracking, all my beautiful people out there on YouTube, friends, family, new subscribers, old subscribers? Welcome back to the HQ. Welcome back to the channel. I am Nicholas. This is BDGE. Big dogs gotta eat. Fantasy football. We're continuing on in our rankings by tiers. On Monday, we dropped our 2019 fantasy football running back rankings by tiers. Thus, we're going to do the wide receivers today. If you missed that one, I would highly suggest going to watch that first, and I break down what tiers mean and how you can draft based on tiers. If you're new to fantasy football, I like to make sure that I'm, putting on for you guys as well. And at any time during the video, if you want to just go download my top 25 rankings broken down by tiers, PPR, standard, half PPR, that link will be in the description as well as probably pinned in the first comment of the comment section. If at any point you're enjoying the video, make sure you hit that thumbs up button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're new. We're covering everything 2019 fantasy football for the rest of the summer, into the season, into next year, into next life. All right? This is in my soul at this point. Let's get it. So I want to drop a big fact on you to start with before we actually get into the rankings. And I want you guys to guess. George, you're not allowed to guess this because I know you probably cheated when I asked you in the group me that first time. Last year, Julio Jones and Davante Adams combined for 21 touchdowns. They combined for a hell of a lot of receptions and receiving yards and air yards and touchdowns and all these things. I want you to guess down below how many touchdown receptions of more than 35 yards Julio and Davante Adams combined for last year in 2018. Both monster seasons by the two. How many touchdowns of 35 plus yards, so more than 35 yards, did the two have combined? After that, I want you to go edit that comment or drop another comment in the thread. And I want you to guess how many touchdowns of 40 plus yards Albert Wilson and Cooper Kupp had combined last year. Kupp played in 8 games. Albert Wilson played in 7 games. It's an absurd stat, and I'm going to get to it halfway through the video, but I want you guys to guess first. It blew my fucking mind. We'll put it that way. Oh, also, I got some new ink this weekend. Shouldn't slap a tattoo. Don't slap new tattoos if you get them. In case I want to ball, I want to dunk on y'all. I got that lightning bolt on my calf, so I got hella bunnies now. Tier 1. Tier 1 is made up of 2 receivers. And I'll be honest with you, after I wrote this article, this is not my rankings anymore. We have D-Hop and we have Davante Adams in tier of their own. After doing this article, Davante Adams is my number 1. I think they're the no-brainers, number 1 and number 2, and I could really care less who you take as a wide receiver 1 out of the two of them. I tried to find Vegas odds on wide receivers, like their player prop numbers, but I couldn't find any up to date. So if anyone has some good Vegas odds numbers for player props, please hook me up. Drop it down below in the comment section. I wanted to see what Vegas had as the league leaders for receiving yards, receptions, receiving touchdowns, and things like that for the upcoming NFL season. They didn't really have any, but I would imagine that Davante Adams is the clear favorite to lead the NFL in receiving touchdowns. Hopkins is probably like second in every category, probably second in yards behind Julio and, up there in receptions and touchdowns and whatnot. But we're going to come out of the gate firing big facts at y'all. So make sure you tuck your shirt in. I want you to stop yelling. I'm not yelling. My voice is at like a 4 right now. It could hit 8. Adams ranked 3rd in the NFL last year with a 28.7% target market share. So he saw 28.7% of the Packers' targets last year, which is the 3rd highest rate of any NFL wide receiver. So you think of him as like a dominant possession receiver, right? Moves the chains, first down, doesn't drop balls. But he's also a great downfield threat and downfield receiver. He caught 5 passes of 40 plus yards last year, which was tied for 7th most in the NFL among that category. However, he was 7th highest in the NFL in that category, but he only accounted for 33%, so a third of his team's 40-plus yard receptions, which was the 31st highest rate. So on raw volume, the 7th most 40-plus yard touchdown or 40-plus yard catches, the 31st highest rate in terms of what market share of his team's yards he had for that. Marquez Valdes-Scantling was right behind him at 27%. Despite tying for the 7th most catches of 40-plus yards last year, he had 0 receiving touchdowns of more than 25 yards. Davante Adams did not have a single receiving touchdown of over 25 yards. Here are a list of a few guys that had receiving touchdowns of 40-plus yards. Chris Manhertz, Robert Tonyan. He's a Green Bay Packer, Robert Tonyan. There were 5 Green Bay Packers that had a 40-plus yard touchdown last year. Davante Adams was None of those 5. Russell Shepard, Leonte Carew. Like, these are guys who had 40-plus yard touchdowns, and Davante Adams did not. He gets the volume. He gets the volume downfield. Unluckily, none of the deep passes turned into touchdowns last year, but that will change this year based on positive regression. If 2 or even one of those receptions of 40-plus yards goes for a touchdown, we're probably looking at Davante Adams as the clear-cut wide receiver 1 in fantasy this year. And I was doing my quarterback write-up for like this episode, but for quarterbacks coming out next Monday. And I got to Aaron Rodgers, and I was like, you know what? I really want to break down and see like what to make of the 2018 season, because it was a down year by most standards for Rodgers. And I looked, and one of the stats that we always use for predicting quarterback touchdown rates, the overall percentage of his attempts that go for touchdowns. Now, Rodgers is a career, up to 2018, as a starter for Green Bay, he had a career touchdown rate of 6.5%. Which is very, very high, and probably goes down as one of the top 10, if not top 5 percentage rates of all time. But that's over like a 10-year period, so we know that's not fluky. Last year, his touchdown rate dropped to 4.2%. So he was like 2.3% lower than his normal average. And that doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're throwing the ball 600 times, that's almost an extra 10, 14 touchdowns. And Adams already had 13 touchdowns. So I think Rodgers is in for a monster bounce back here touchdown-wise, which can only mean good things for Adams. They add 0 pieces to this offense. And that's the thing, man. His red zone usage is not fluky. He's been a top 5 most targeted player, not just wide receiver, but player, weapon in the red zone in back-to-back-to-back years now. 2018, 2017, 2016, top 5 most red zone targets. Rodgers absolutely loves him there. He rarely even looks anywhere else. Like, he doesn't look at his other weapons besides Davante Adams there. So while a lot of wide receivers, you might say like touchdowns are volatile, touchdowns are fluky, Davante Adams is the one guy that you can pretty confidently say that his floor is double-digit touchdowns if he's on the field. So the fact that they didn't add anyone in that wide receiver group tells me that he's a very, very strong bet to lead the league again, and I'd be very surprised if he doesn't do so. All offseason, and even last year, Rodgers has literally just talked about how good Adams is, how much he's open, like he's open every play. We need to keep targeting. And that was after, he was getting target totals of like 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 in games, and Rodgers is still like, he's not getting the ball enough. He's not getting the ball enough. You know what? I'm gonna wait for the bold prediction video to come out, because I like to make a bold prediction video every year, fantasy wise, and I think Davante Adams is gonna be one of them. And I think we're being set up for a year in which Davante Adams is going to absolutely smash records. Unbelievable amount of targets, receptions, and the touchdown total here this year. And the other thing is, like, we're hearing a lot about Davante Adams moving into the slot more. And one thing I looked at was, like, we have Matt LaFleur coming in as a new head coach, right? So we're going to start running a little bit of a different offense than we had with Mike McCarthy last year. And Matt LaFleur saying, yeah, we want to use him more in the slot. Can we actually affirm that? Is that going to be a thing that we actually see in 2019? Did he do it with Corey Davis, right? Because if you're going to compare Davante Adams to a player that we could see with the Matt LaFleur offense, it would have absolutely been Corey Davis in Tennessee, right? The bigger receiver, usually the outside guy. Does he move him more into the slot? So you look at Davis's snaps in 2017 without LaFleur, out wide for 92% of the snaps, in the slot for 8.5% of the snaps. Matt LaFleur comes into Tennessee, Davis's snaps in 2018, now he's a 70% out wide guy, 30% slot guy. So his slot went up by about 22%. So it looks like some big facts, man. Davante Adams lined up in the slot in 2017 on 14.7% of his snaps, and then 18.8% in 2018. Despite only lining up in the slot on 18.8% of his snaps last year, he had over 24% of his receptions from the slot, almost 23% of his yards from the slot, scored 23% of his touchdowns from the slot, and saw over 22% of his targets from the slot. So if Adams is in the slot, if he does in fact move to the slot more, which we should expect given Matt LaFleur's history with this type of receiver, his numbers are going to be ridiculously high. He's going to be open on every single play, and Rodgers has already been saying he's going to be throwing Davante Adams all day motherfudging long. As I was saying, yeah, it was D-Hop before, but I just think Adams might actually just smash records in 2019. So that is the first tier, and I want to break down that stat that I plugged in the beginning of the video. So Adams and Julio Jones combined for 0 touchdowns of more than 35 yards. Cooper Kupp, Albert Wilson, who only played in 15 games combined for 6 touchdowns of 40 plus yards. Pretty absurd. I just thought it was a crazy stat when I was doing my research. And if you're following me on Twitter, Nick_BDGE, you'll see me as I'm doing these blogs and these articles and these videos. Anytime I find like a super interesting stat, I usually tweet it out. So make sure you're following me there, because you'll get some other valuable tricks, tips, nuggets, concerns, questions, comments, anything. Drop them down below, please. Hit that thumbs up button while you're down there. Let's move to the second tier. So we just had Adams and Hopkins in tier number 1. Tier 2, we'll call this like the upper echelon. And I want to do a little spiel about Tyreek Hill. He's still not going to be in my rankings right now. If this is like best ball, he's probably 12 to 15 in that range. Until we know more about his actual situation, I know that the criminal charges were dropped, or the criminal cases dropped. That does not mean that he's in the clear whatsoever. Now, just looking at a possible punishment from the NFL, which is still very, very likely. And if he plays the full 16, he's probably my wide receiver 3 or 4 if we're getting 16 games out of him in this offense. He is a bit inconsistent, and I know that, and we know that because we can look at the Big Dogs consistency charts, which are in my Big Dogs draft guide, which drop on July 1st. BigDogsDraftGuide.com. Make sure you check that out. It's got everything you need for your 2019 fantasy football season. In the charts, we basically have 5 categories for consistency. We have busty, extra medium, cooking, booming, faded the public. Busty is from 0 to 7 fantasy points. Extra medium, 7 to 12. Cooking is 13 to 17. Booming is 17 to 24. And then faded the public is 24 plus. When you look at Tyreek Hill last year, he did finish as literally the overall wide receiver 1. But 7 of his 16 games came in the busty or extra medium category. So from 0 to 7 or from 7 to 12. That doesn't really feel like an elite wide receiver 1, because that should be a player finishing as wide receiver 1 that should help you win your matchup almost on a weekly basis. He had 0 cooking games from 12 to 17 points. 0 games between 12 and 17 points, which is actually hard to believe. But he did lead the NFL with 5 faded the public, and that means 24 or more half PPR points. So no other wide receiver in the NFL had more than 3. He had 5. Take the good with the bad, right? Second year with Mahomes as a starter. I mean, I'm definitely cool with him as my wide receiver 1. I'm not going to complain about that. But if you're going to do that, make sure your wide receiver 2 or 3 has a little bit more week-over-week consistency. I think like Hill with your wide receiver 1, and then you could probably get Edelman in the 4th or 5th round as your wide receiver 2. I think that's a good combination right there. Let's move on to tier 2. We have Julio, Odell, JuJu Smith-Schuster, and Michael Thomas. I ain't really got a good excuse for Julio Jones being in this tier and not in the first one. Coming off an NFL leading 10 separate games last year of 100-plus receiving yards. Led the NFL with 1,677 receiving yards. Yes, the touchdowns are a concern for sure, but he had 8 last year, which is a good number. But you look at guys like Hopkins and Adams, who seem like they're virtually a lock for double digit, if not like 12 or more touchdowns on a year-over-year basis. You know what? I'm actually like embarrassed how long I take to research some of these videos. So if I release a video that's like 45 minutes, I probably put like 4.5 hours, if not, actually probably way more than that, research into these videos. I tried so hard to find some key points or facts that tell me why I should put Julio into that top tier. Dirk Cutter coming over as the offensive coordinator. I look back at the per game numbers, right? And Cutter was the offensive coordinator from 2012 to 2014. And Julio had a lot of big years. And I'm trying to figure out, like, should we expect an elite year, right? Like, is he going to be the wide receiver 1? I looked at the per game numbers. I looked at the usage in the red zone, inside the 10 zone. The only discrepancy I could find between those 3 seasons and like the last 3 seasons between Julio is the number of deep touchdowns Julio scores with versus without Dirk Cutter as the offensive coordinator. Red zone usage, inside the 10 zone usage, volume overall were nearly identical with Cutter and without Cutter for Julio. So were the number of overall deep targets and the percentage of overall targets that he got that were deep, if that makes sense. It just turns out that a couple more of those deep targets happened to luckily turn into touchdowns, which would skew the percentages a little bit because it is a small sample size. I think we could just kind of assume more of the same out of Julio. And, he's giving you 80-plus catches and 1,400 or more yards in 4 or 5 straight seasons. He's an elite wide receiver in that sense, but I'm not sure that we're going to see him compete with the Adamses and DeAndre Hopkins because his touchdown totals never really hit that ceiling that we wanted to hit. So he is my 3, and I'm happy to take him there, like at the turn. Odell Beckham is my number 4. My concerns for Odell have absolutely nothing to do with his play. I acknowledge that he has wide receiver 1 upside in fantasy this year, no doubt. Injuries are more of a concern for me. When you're looking at his injury history, man, it is extremely concerning to say the least. Hip, hamstring, vertebrae, more hamstring, hip, thumb, ankle, quad, and the far majority of those are lower leg injuries. After a while, those things add up when you have a dozen injuries in a 3-4 year period, man. That's, we got, at the end of the day, like, these are humans, you know what I mean? Like, these are people who continually take beatings. Like, I play basketball sometimes, I hurt my ankle, like, that shit still hurts the next summer. Like, I got to take that summer off and then the following summer. Odell Beckham's out here shattering his ankle and then pulling multiple hamstrings and doing that over and over and over again. I just think that he's someone that scares me in the injury category. So, again, I acknowledge the upside, but I think the injury risk has to be baked into that very, 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 very heavily. And I am someone who's becoming more and more risk averse in the earlier rounds of seasonal drafts. I don't like using my first, second, even third round pick on guys that have a big injury risk or flag next to their name. And I pulled up player props for him, which I don't think they've been updated since like early May, but nothing new is added to Cleveland. So I'm assuming that most of the props for Odell Beckham for 2019 haven't changed much. They had him pegged at 89.5 receptions, 1150 for yards, and 9 touchdowns, all with the juice of minus 115. So that's Vegas's way of putting that at like a 50-50. So they have him at a 90, 1159 stat line for this upcoming year. And if you use those numbers as projections, that's almost 214 fantasy points in half PPR. That would have made him wide receiver 10 last year, and actually wide receiver 17 in points per game. If he plays a full 16, I'd probably take the over on all of those if we knew that, like 89.5 receptions, 1150 yards, 9 touchdowns. But I just think there's there's the risk of injury. He's in a new offense with a new quarterback, which is obviously an upgrade, but anytime you just add more variables into the situation, I think there's a little bit more risk than most people realize. So he's my wide receiver 4. Before we get to wide receiver 5, though, I want to drop a little bit of a commissioner's note as someone who commissions, is that the way you say it? I commission a lot of leagues each year, dynasty and redraft. This is perfect for that. We've partnered up with TeamStake. TeamStake.com is pretty much a specialized platform to help you organize your fantasy leagues in a sense, right? So if you're the commissioner, or one of your good friends is the commissioner of your league, have them sign up for TeamStake.com. It's completely free to use. You're not charged for the software. You're not charged to host your league on there. You don't host your league on there, but you do your buy-ins on there. So it's basically an organized version of PayPal or Venmo, or just having to collect cash, that specializes in fantasy leagues. So your commissioner can open up the league on teamstake.com, and then literally all he has to do is send you a link. He could send it through the phone, he could send it through a group chat that you guys are in, and then you go in and pay your league dues, and boom, it's done. And it's super customizable, so you could do league payouts for like first, second, third place, most points in the regular season, most points, and blah, 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 blah. And it's very, very, very customizable. So pretty much any kind of payout or buy-in situation that you want your league to have is available on teamstake.com. They also have a cool feature called it's like a late fee feature. So, if you're the commissioner and you're like, yo, we draft in a week, buy-in dues are due 3 days before the actual draft, you could set a late fee on it. So if someone doesn't buy in by the late fee date, like 3 days before the draft, then they have to pay an additional $10. And then you can set it up so fees roll over, which is great for dynasty leagues because you want people to pay a little bit more up front. So that means they're more committed to the long-term future. So you could set it up so that people pay 50% extra on the dynasty fee, so that 50% goes to their buy-in in the following year, and just you could set it up so that money rolls over. Like I said, there's no charge. There are ways of getting payouts from TeamStake at the end of the year with absolutely no charge. So no percentage taken. Very safe, secure. You're going to go have to look up their security, encryption, whatever, documents on the website. But I promise I've been using teamstake.com. So go check them out, teamstake.com, for your fantasy league. Thank you for sponsoring today's video. I'm going to take a lot of heat for this one. I know, JuJu at number 5 over Michael Thomas, and I will take that. I will cop that all day, 7 days a week, 9 days a week, 31 days a week. I'm going to take JuJu over Michael Thomas. I've talked endlessly about JuJu for this upcoming year. It's well documented on my channel. Literally any point you can make to me about JuJu regressing, I think I'm pretty set up to counter those points. Double teams. Everyone's like, oh, double teams are going to happen without Antonio Brown. Here's the thing, guys. Double teams are not a big part of the NFL. You don't have 2 cornerbacks lining up on 1 wide receiver. At like the highest rate, that happens on maybe 8% of a wide receiver's routes if they are one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Like 8 to 9%, very tops. JuJu, his best statistical games of his career so far have come when AB has been sidelined. There have been 3 games, and in those 3 games, he has played more snaps outside than he has in the slot, and those have been his best statistical games of his career. So AB was gone, he was getting all this magical, made-up, hypothetical double coverage, and he produced at the highest level of his career. Sure, there are going to be safeties. When people say double coverage, I don't think they even understand what they mean by that. I think they're just saying that without any knowledge of how the fucking NFL works. Yeah, there are going to be safeties that play over the top, right? He'll have his cornerback on him, and there will be safeties that play over the top that guard deep against the long ball. That's not JuJu's game. JuJu's not Antonio Brown. JuJu's not going to catch 60-yard touchdown passes where the ball travels 60 yards through the air. The air yards are much lower for a guy like JuJu than they are for Antonio Brown. He scores those long touchdowns by way of yak, yards after catch. JuJu, I know some people like to say that yak is not a sticky statistic in terms of like predicting year over year, and it's kind of fluky. But JuJu has been top 2 among NFL wide receivers in yak in both years 1 and year 2. It seems pretty sticky to me for him. He is very good at making plays after the catch. So you could put the safeties deep on him if you want, but he's not beating you over the top to begin with. He's a guy who makes the plays at the point of attack. He makes the catches, makes guys miss, and then breaks long runs after that. Last year, he finished with 7 touchdowns. He was tackled inside the 2-yard line 5 separate times. That 7 touchdown number is going up. James Conner also took more goal line carries last year, and just last year, than Le'Veon Bell had as the prior 3 years of him playing as a starter in Pittsburgh. So do we see Conner get less goal line carries, and do we see maybe more targets for JuJu? JuJu gets tackled on the 2-yard line. James Conner gets all these easy cleanup touchdowns. I don't think that happens again this year. And that's the other thing. I should have included that in James Conner's little outlook in the running back rankings video last year. Will there be less volume in the passing game overall? Probably. Big Ben threw the ball like 680 times, I think. But people act as if it's about to go from a passing offense to a run-first offense. They were literally the most pass-heavy offense in the NFL last year. So at very worst, they're going to be a middle-of-the-pack passing offense, and I still think they're going to be top 10 in terms of volume. But the thing about that is even if volume drops, 169 targets left from AB and another like 40 less left from Jesse James. You know, we're going to get a little bit deeper here. Last year, they threw the ball on 68% of their plays. That is an extremely high number, and it's an outlier even for them. They typically throw the ball on around 60% of their plays. In almost all of the previous 5 seasons before 2018, they threw the ball on about 60% of their plays. And they typically run about 65 plays per game on average over that time span of the 5 years. Their normal year is about 625 pass attempts, which is good for top 3 almost every season from an NFL passing volume standpoint. So you can predict the volume to come down, sure, but we have a very baseline feeling of the pace that they're going to run with, percentage of plays in which are going to be passes, right? Because there's very, very even number of both those categories over the last 5 years or so. And that's what we can probably project for it to regress down to. So if they pass the ball on like 625 attempts, last year JuJu saw 24% of the targets here. That was his market share. I think it's safe to say that without AB, his target share will go up. That percentage is going to go up. I think we can all agree on that, right? If he jumps up to 27%, which wouldn't be the league lead, but it would be amongst, the higher NFL guys. I think DeAndre Hopkins was around 30, Julio probably like 28, Davante Adams, like I said, like 27-ish. So if he jumps up into like the top 5 in terms of target percentage, which I think is very reasonable, 27%, you're looking at easily 170 targets this year for JuJu. That's with the pass volume decrease. If somehow they stay up there and he has that percentage, he's going to go through the fucking ceiling is the roof for him, as Snacks would say. Everything is set up for JuJu to absolutely dominate in 2019, and any argument against him is just dumb, not backed up by facts. So I'll back up facts on facts on facts on facts on racks on racks on racks, and you guys can keep making up your hypothetical double coverage theories that don't make sense. Let's move on to Michael Thomas. Realistically, guys, this is a Saints offense that just doesn't throw the ball much anymore. They keep it on the ground. They throw their running backs at a higher pace than almost any team in the NFL last year. They ranked 28th last year in their percentage of plays that were passes. 54% of their plays were passes, the 5th lowest in the NFL. In 2017, they ranked 20th, so the 12th lowest in the NFL. That's just their game plan. It's to keep Drew Brees upright. It's to keep him healthy. It's to keep him off the ground. He doesn't want to take quarterback hits, and you do that by running the ball, and you do that by passing to your running backs. The problem is passing it to the running backs at such a high rate is 5th lowest percentage of overall plays were passes. 29% of their overall passes last year went to the running backs, which is the 2nd highest rate in the entire NFL. And that was a year after being the 1st highest rate. 32% of their passes in 2017 went to the running backs. So you not only don't pass the ball that much, but when you do, such a large percentage of them go to the running backs. Last year, only 13% of their passes went to the tight end. Only Detroit had a lower percentage. So now they bring in Jared Cook, and I would assume more of the targets go that way. So they're going to throw at a low pace. They're going to throw to the running backs at a very high rate. Now, Jared Cook, who's probably the best tight end they've had in a while, is going to command more targets. So I don't like this for Michael Thomas, for as amazing as a wide receiver as he is. Like, if Michael Thomas was the one in Green Bay and not Davante Adams, Michael Thomas would probably go for 130 receptions and 1,700 yards and 17 touchdowns. Truth of it is, Thomas just isn't in the situation to really succeed in that way. Also, like, Thomas was not an elite fantasy wide receiver at all last year after week 3, right? Those first 3 games, he balled. Same thing with Kamara. When Mark Ingram was gone, right? We saw Michael Thomas and Kamara just go nuts. When Mark Ingram returned, their offense just went a different direction. And you could look at it, right? Weeks 1 through 3, Michael Thomas had 2 100-plus receiving yard games. All 3 games were double-digit targets. All 3 games were double-digit receptions. And all 3 games he went for 17.5 or more fantasy points. He was going crazy in the beginning. From weeks 4 through 17, the remaining 13 weeks, he had the same number of 100-plus yard games, the same number of double-digit target games, double-digit reception games, 17.5-plus fantasy point games. Was he bad? Of course not. No, he was still awesome. But is he worth a first-round pick? Is he worth the back end of the first half, early second round, ahead of JuJu, who's probably going to get 170 targets? No. Let's move on to tier number 3. And again, guys, if you want to download my top 25 at any time, you can do that down below. If you want my top 250 big board, if you want all of my rankings broken down by tiers, positionally, PPR, standard, half PPR, those will be in the draft guide, as I already kind of mentioned to you guys before. BigDogsDraftGuide.com. You could pre-order it now. It drops on July 1st. It's got a ton of other things in there. Top sleepers, bust, must-draft players by round. My top 15, 20 favorite resources and websites to use where I get all these statistics from. I'm not only going to tell you who to draft, but I don't like doing that. I want to teach you to become a better fantasy football player. When you're done with the draft guide, that is what you're going to get out of it. So go check that out, BigDogsDraftGuide.com. Tier number 3, made up of 3 wide receivers: Mike Evans, Antonio Brown, and T.Y. Hilton. All of these guys have very good underrated floors, in my opinion. I'm not really sure where Antonio Brown or T.Y. Hilton's ceiling really is, to be honest. Things could go south in Oakland very quickly, and getting a call from Albania. It's a beautiful thing. AB could wind up catching, 90 passes for 1,200 yards or 1,300 yards, but also scoring like 5 or 6 touchdowns. I think that's not out of his range of outcomes. So that's kind of why he makes me nervous. There's a lot of variables being added to the equation there when it goes to AB. He's getting a downgrade in quarterback. That locker room is an issue, and it could just spill over to the on-field play, and we don't really know what's going to happen there in Oakland. With Mike Evans, though, man, with Deshaun Jackson and Adam Humphries leaving in Tampa Bay, it seems like Mike Evans should go back to where he was prior to Deshaun Jackson being there in Tampa Bay, where he was routinely getting 165, 170 targets a season, which was amongst the league leaders for wide receivers. He'll also reclaim a ton of those deep balls from Deshaun Jackson's plate, right? Something Evans, I think, is like perennially underrated for as being one of the best deep ball wide receivers in the NFL. So I think with those guys leaving, not only should the volume be up for Mike Evans in terms of targets, but where that volume is coming from. I think they're going to be very, very valuable targets that he gets added onto his statistics coming off of a year where he just set career highs almost across the board. So I'm really excited to see what Mike Evans does this year. I'm very, very, very high on him. I haven't actually seen him ranked this high. I thought him around wide receiver 7 would be about average, but most people have him around the 10 spot, if not a little bit lower. But I love Mike Evans there. T.Y. Hilton, man, I mean, this is very much like my argument for Marlon Mack. Just give me the wide receiver 1, give me the running back 1 in an offense that's going to be arguably the league's best, highest scoring, and most efficient. Hilton and Luck have almost 5 years of chemistry going back, and Luck's shoulder will be fully healthy. Hilton is just so underrated, and for all of the weapons that they brought in, I think it's more noise than actual real life. Like Devin Funchess is a red zone guy, and that's not where T.Y. Hilton excels anyways. His fantasy production comes from deep passes. It comes from racking up those first downs. He's not someone who's going to get, top 5 numbers in terms of red zone and 10 zone receptions or targets, right? Paris Campbell comes in. He's an exciting rookie with a lot of buzz, but he's not even running with the starters yet, right? Chester Rogers and Devin Funchess are in the starting lineup right now in camp so far. Paris Campbell's exciting because of his 40 time and all of the metrics and things like that, but he's not going to be the thing that holds down T.Y. Hilton from being an elite fantasy wide receiver. We'll put it that way. Last year, the Colts completed 7 passes of 40-plus yards. T.Y. Hilton had 6 of them. Those are going to be coming again with arguably the most accurate quarterback in football. I'll take Hilton at the end of the 3rd round over Antonio Brown at the end of the 2nd round all day and tomorrow. His numbers last year on a per-game basis were just as good as they were two or 3 years ago, the year that he was going into fantasy drafts as a top 5 wide receiver. People were overwhelmingly drafting him as like the number 5 wide receiver. His numbers last year were actually better on a fantasy points per game basis. Hilton is such a good pick at the end of the 3rd round, in my opinion. Tier 4. This is a tier that could go a lot of different ways. We have yet to see the ceiling for Diggs and Amari Cooper. And then you look at guys like Thielen, Keenan, and Edelman, who are all PPR studs, and their floor is extremely, extremely appealing. Adam Thielen disappeared during the second half of the year last year, right? No surprise. He was the wide receiver 1 over the first half of the season, 8 straight games of 100 yards to start the season. Second half of the season, he was like wide receiver 25. And Stephon Diggs scored 14 fantasy points or more in 5 of their final 8 games and was by far and away the better wide receiver, was more productive, and was far more consistent. The other 3 games that he didn't score over 14 fantasy points were not complete duds either, like Thielen's. But I still buy the narrative of the big slot receiver being successful in the NFL, and that's exactly what Thielen is. And it's just easy path to targets. It's an easy path to not seeing the number 1 cornerback on the other team. It's an easy pass to having a lot of separation between you and the defensive back, which just leads to a lot of targets, a lot of volume, especially in any kind of PPR league. So realistically, Thielen is this high only because I can't really think of a lot of guys that I want ahead of him. Like, I think there's a monster tier drop-off between those top 9 guys and then the tier that we're getting into right now. And like I said, while we still haven't seen Diggs' ceiling yet, and I feel like in a really good offense, had he been in like Brandon Cooks' situation throughout his career thus far, I think Stephon Diggs probably would have produced like multiple 13, 14, 1,500 yard from scrimmage seasons. But you look at the offense with Mike Zimmer and Kevin Stefanski taking over, and we saw how run heavy they were once Stefanski took over as the OC for the last 3 weeks of the season. And they were one of the most run heavy teams in the NFL during that span. Healthy Dalvin Cook, they're going to lean on the ground game a lot, and I don't think we're going to see Diggs' ceiling in 2019. So I would rather take the floor of Adam Thielen than a hypothetical ceiling of Stephon Diggs next year. When we look at Amari Cooper, he was great when he came over to Dallas, of course, but he was also super volatile. Like, we saw the games that he had. He had a 180-yard game. He had that 217-yard game, but he also scored 7.5 or fewer fantasy points in 6 of the 9 games with Dallas. So yeah, he had those amazing games, but he also had those really anti-amazing games. I can cut him some slack. Of course, there's going to be some inconsistency and some volatility when you're coming over to a team halfway through the season. He's got to learn the playbook. He's got to get chemistry with the quarterback. It's just a whole new situation. Usually means bad things for any player that's making a move like that. He was traded mid-year, but you saw in the playoffs how big of a part of the offense he was, going 7 for 106 in one of the playoff games, and then he goes 6 for 65 and a touchdown in the other playoff games. So good mojo going into next year. I think we really, he's the downright wide receiver 1 in that offense. Whereas you look at Stephon Diggs, not the case, and you could probably make that case for a lot of other wide receivers that are around this ranking range when you really get down to it. So Cooper, I still think he's going to be a little bit volatile, but I think the volume will be there, and he's someone that I will like to own in a couple of my seasonal leagues. If I'm in 5 leagues, maybe I'll try to grab him in 1 or 2 of them, and hopefully he blows up in those 2. You know what I mean? Because you don't want to completely avoid a player or completely target them in every league. I think just diversifying is a really good thing, and Cooper's one of those guys that I will definitely be trying to diversify with. Julian Edelman is the last guy in this tier. And I think you could argue that he should be higher. He was the wide receiver 12 last year when he came back from a suspension. He was suspended from weeks 1 to 4, right? From weeks 5 to 17, he was the wide receiver 12. There's no Gronk here. There's no Chris Hogan here. Not that shit matters. They bring in N'Keal Harry, so it's, that's kind of like 1 for 1. In this tier, Julian Edelman kind of mixes his lack of big plays and his injury risk, his age, to the consistency he brings on a week-to-week basis. So I definitely think there are red flags. I think he's coming off this year where you didn't see any injuries and you didn't see any volatility and nothing bad happened. So you kind of forget all of the years prior to that. But this was his best year pretty much. On a per-game basis, this was the best year that we've ever seen out of Edelman. And he was a monster in the playoffs as well. But realistically, we do have a pretty big sample size of who Edelman was prior to this year. I think it's a great situation where he is as one of the only real weapons in this offense in the passing game. But you can't just completely discount the injury history he has. So I think tight end wide receiver 14 is about the right spot for Edelman. Let's move on to tier 5. This is just Brandon Cooks and Kenny Golladay. We're going to break these 2 down pretty in depth. In my opinion, Brandon Cooks is the easy wide receiver 1 in LA. Say what you want about Robert Woods, but Cooks set a career high with 1,204 receiving yards while missing a game. He caught 80 passes for the second time in his career. He had a 4-year touchdown low of 5 and still finished very highly among fantasy wide receivers. That was his lowest total since his rookie year. 5 receiving touchdowns. He had a rushing touchdown as well. I expect that to bounce back up. Cooks was also like the guy in the playoffs. 7 for 107 against New Orleans, and then obviously in the Super Bowl, 13 targets, 8 catches for 120 yards. So when it mattered, he was absolutely the guy. And come the alpha down the stretch. I think that's something that we're going to see continue into next year. And Cooper Kupp coming back, obviously Cooper Kupp missed a lot of games, right? He missed 9 games last year. Him coming back, like what does that mean for the LA receivers? Well, when you look at the numbers, man, you should be the opposite of worried. In split is games with Cooper Kupp on the field. Out of split is without Cooper Kupp on the field. 18 fantasy points per game, half PPR, while Kupp is on the field. 10.5 while Kupp is not on the field. Receptions are up. Targets are up. Look at the receiving yard splits. 59.8 receiving yards with Kupp on the field, or without Kupp on the field, I should say. 111 receiving yards per game in the 6 games that Kupp was on the field. Cooks was actually far better when Kupp was on the field, which is great for his 2019 fantasy football outlook. Cooks is 25 years old. 4 straight 1,100 yard from scrimmage seasons on his resume. His worst statistical season over the last 4 years was in 2017 when he went 65 for 1082 and 7. He's like a Julio Jones light, where you know what you're getting from him, and the upside is actually still kind of yet to be seen, in my opinion. Last year, he saw 7 targets in 73% of the team's games. Cooks' floor is way higher than people think. I think they think of him as a boomer bust guy, super volatile, but that is not who he is as a player. And like I said, I'm not even sure we've seen his ceiling yet. So I absolutely love Brandon Cooks in the 4th round. So while other people are taking all these running backs, that are volatile, that don't catch patches, that have all these knee injury concerns or whatever, Brandon Cooks I think is a phenomenal 4th round pick in redraft this year. Then we have Kenny Golladay. And I stated this on Twitter. Kenny G could be a problem in 2019. He accounted for 31.4% of the Lions' receiving yards last year, which was the 6th highest rate of any receiver in the NFL, despite only seeing a 23.7% target market share. Now, obviously, 23.7% target market share is a good number. It's a high number, but for him to jump up 8% in terms of his production compared to the volume is great efficiency. The Lions had 4 receptions that went for 40-plus yards last year. Kenny Golladay accounted for 3 of them. And to be honest with you, right now he's going around pick 45. I'm really surprised. I thought Kenny G would be like a unanimous pick by the public to have like a big time breakout year this year. And I thought he would be like a 3rd round pick pretty much. And he still might be by the time, drafts roll around late August, early September. But it seems like the public is pretty tempered when it comes to Kenny Golladay this year. He did have a breakout year last year, right? 118 targets, 70 receptions, 1,063 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns in 15 games. Did he play? Yeah, 15 games. But he did deal with a lot of inconsistency, despite not sharing the field with Marvin Jones and or Golden Tate for the majority of this season. He had 5 busty games going back to the Big Dog's consistency charts. Busty, again, is 0 to 7 fantasy points, or somewhere in that range for a half PPR. He had 5 of those games. He had 0 games where he downright faded the public, which is 24 or more fantasy points. Almost half. 7 of his games were booming or cooking, which is between 12 and 24 fantasy points, which is, nice. It's not 7 of 15 is good. You need your wide receiver 2 to be in there if you want to compete for a championship. He had games where he legit felt like a wide receiver 1, right? And you're like, yo, this is it. This is the Kenny G we've been waiting for. Smooth Kenny G. You also saw games like Arizona in week 14 when he catches 2 of 4 targets for 5 receiving yards. And you're like, okay, he's not ready yet. And you look at the splits over the second half of the year, right? When Marvin Jones was out, he went out after week 10 or during week 10. Golden Tate was traded, I think, around week 8 or 9. And you're like, okay, Kenny G should have been a lot better over the second half of the year. That wasn't the case. His fantasy points were almost the same. They were actually worse in standard leagues, which is crazy. But when you look at the target numbers, that's what's important. The targets went from 6.3 per game over the first half of the year to 9.3 per game over the second half of the year. His yards go up, receptions go up, the touchdown numbers don't go up, and that's why the fantasy points don't go up overall. Touchdowns, when it comes from receivers, those are volatile year to year, unless your name is Davante Adams. Everyone else, touchdowns are going to be volatile. So the fact that Kenny G kind of started off with a 5-touchdown year tells me that he's going to go up next year, right? It's sort of like how Mike Evans went from like 13 to 4 up to 10. It's like that. I can kind of see Kenny G being on a trajectory like that. I also think that the team was just shit over the second half of the year, right? They were just trash, and that just didn't lead to many scoring opportunities. They went 2-7 over Kenny G's final 9 games. He missed week 17. That's why I say Kenny G's final 9 games. I think the offense is going to be a lot more efficient and just better overall in 2019. But they also get, I got to play devil's advocate here. They get Marvin Jones back. So while Golladay is a great downfield threat, I mentioned that he accounted for 3 of the 4 plays that went for 40-plus yards. You look at the volume in terms of deep targets. When Marvin Jones was on the field from weeks 1 to 10, he saw 15 compared to Kenny G's 9. As soon as Marvin Jones went out of the lineup, Kenny G saw 16 deep targets, which are, per PFF, 20-plus yards down the field. Everyone else, 4. So Kenny G saw 16 of the 20 deep targets from weeks 11 to 16. Whereas when Marvin Jones was on the field, he was out-targeting Kenny G by a 3-to-2 ratio in deep targets. Or a 5-to-3? Yeah, 5-to-3 ratio in deep targets. And we also look at Darrell Bevell coming in, who's the new OC, and he runs the ball. He thinks running the ball is a very successful way to do things in the NFL today, which couldn't be further from the truth. But he's going to run the ball like that's the only thing he's allowed to do, which is going to hurt all the pass catchers in this offense, obviously. They bring in TJ Hawkinson, who's going to take red zone looks away from not only Kenny Golladay, but Marvin Jones, Kerryon Johnson, all that stuff, So as a pure athlete, Golladay is probably more fun to imagine him being an absolute monster breakout this year. So I think the public probably actually has him right in the mid to late 4th round as a pick. And we move on to the last tier here, which is the WYD, the what you doing tier. Tier 6, AJ Green, Robert Woods, Sammy Watkins, Tyler Boyd. AJ Green, my concerns for AJ Green are well documented on my channel, as they are from Dr. Jesse Morse, who, if you've missed those injury videos, I would highly recommend you check them out. Super, super valuable. He will not move any higher on this list for me. AJ Green is my wide receiver 17. He has not hit 1,300 receiving yards since 2013. He's coming off a very serious foot injury, and he's going to be 31. Say what you want about the offensive line, about the quarterback play, about how good he is on a per-game numbers, about how amazing he is for that. If he's healthy, then you're getting these numbers, blah, 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 blah. At some point, you just got to get it done. Hasn't hit 1,300 receiving yards since 2013, when you have Julio Jones doing it for 5 straight years. Just get it done, or you're not a top fantasy wide receiver. And that is my concern with Green. The foot is a huge concern for me. He's much like Devonta Freeman. Everyone else can grab him in that 3rd round and talk about all the value you're getting and all that hypothetical upside. Wide receiver 1, RB1, blah, 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 blah. In round 3, I'm going to pass on that. Robert Woods is my wide receiver 18. He's awesome, but I think he is actually one that gets hurt by Cooper Kupp returning. Whereas Brandon Cooks, his volume actually went up, right, in terms of receptions and in terms of targets. That wasn't the case with Woods. His target totals dropped when Kupp was on the field. And that's a normal thing, right? You add another weapon to the mix, everyone else's numbers should drop. Makes sense. It makes sense also because Woods is in the slot when Cooper Kupp is not there. He turns into a 65% slot receiver when Kupp is off the field. So obviously his volume will go up and then go back down when Kupp is on the field. If you're predicting future success, right, volume is the number one key to that. And if we know that Cooks gets more volume when Kupp is on the field, but Woods gets less volume when Kupp is on the field, that's not good for Robert Woods. And when I think of Woods, Woods is not a fade by any means. I actually like where he's going in fantasy drafts right now. He's a mid-4th, late 4th round pick, which I think is, again, another solid pick instead of trying to hit one of these landmine running backs in the middle rounds. He's not a fade by any means, but expecting top 10 numbers out of him like he had last year is super aggressive in my opinion. He doesn't score much. Last year's 6 touchdowns were the most that he's ever caught in 6 NFL seasons. He does have this little low-key awesome rushing floor, which I think is great. They give him these end-arounds almost every week. I owned Woods a lot last year in a lot of my fantasy leagues, and watching him play was fun because they were giving him almost 2 end-arounds a game. And he was pretty damn good with them, right? He had nearly 160 yards on the ground and a touchdown there, on top of the receiving stats that were really solid already. He's not exciting. He's a high floor player. He is the king of 5 for 70 stat lines. But after week 1, man, Robert Woods scored 9.5 or more fantasy points in every single game but 1. That is ridiculous consistency. So again, Robert Woods, Julian Edelman, whoever's the cheaper of the two, go with that guy. If you go with Tyreek Hill first, get a high consistency, high floor player like one of these guys as your wide receiver 2, and I think you're going to be set pretty nicely there. And we have 2 more guys to wrap up on this list. We have Sammy Watkins is my wide receiver 19. We're going to have to wait again on Tyreek Hill, so I'm not going to break it down too much. I'm super curious to learn what your guys' projections would be for Sammy Watkins. Let's preface with this. Let's say Tyreek Hill misses all of 2019. Comes out tomorrow that he did beat his kid or whatever, suspended, or even if he's cut, whatever. He doesn't step on the field in 2019. And I tell you that Watkins plays all 16 games in 2019. What are his projections? I want to know what you guys would project him for if that were the case. He plays all 16. Tyreek Hill doesn't play any games at all. I would honestly still have him projected around 70 to 75 receptions, 1,100 to 1,200 yards, and probably 9 touchdowns. which are great numbers. But I just don't think he has the top 5 ceiling that we think he does if Tyreek Hill misses it. Right? I don't think he has that elite ceiling that we wanted to see from him for so long that he just never came to fruition. So if Hill misses significant time, I think Watkins' ADP is going to climb up into the early 4th, probably like the late 3rd round. And with my projections, like those numbers are like good for a 3rd round wide receiver, but those don't factor in the injury concerns that Watkins has had. So I think even if Hill misses time, like Sammy Watkins is a great fantasy option, but also still very risky. And I don't think the ceiling is as high as a lot of people are making it out to be. Again, though, this is very heavily weighing on whether or not Tyreek Hill plays, what his suspension length is, if he misses 2 games, 4 games, 8 games. We don't know. So Sammy Watkins is still kind of a TBD. For the second time in this video, I will preface by saying my feelings on this Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver are well documented on my YouTube channel. I'm talking about Tyler Boyd this time, not AJ Green. I broke down Tyler Boyd very in-depth in a video which I will link up here, my top 3 sleeper wide receivers, which I made that video like right after the season ended, so his ADP was like in the 90s at the time, so I could have considered him a sleeper. Obviously not a sleeper anymore. I'm a really big fan of Boyd this year. I think he is not only a high floor player, but I think his ceiling is a lot higher than people realize. There are a lot of things that could have gone wrong for Boyd for him to just not have performed that well last year. Could have had a lot of excuses for him to not perform well, and that just didn't happen. He's 24 years old. He breaks out for 76 catches, 1,028 receiving yards, so he hits the 1,000-yard mark, 7 touchdowns, while only playing in 14 games. 76 for 1,000 and 7 touchdowns only in 14 games is really, 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 really impressive. And he did it in a terrible offense. They had the 9th fewest passing yards per game. They ranked bottom 5 in terms of snaps, in terms of plays per game, bottom half in scoring overall. Andy Dalton banged up, missed 5 games. AJ Green missed half of the year. So you might assume maybe that's why his stats were escalated, but that's not the case at all. In the 9 games that the two actually played together, Tyler Boyd was far better, and he received a lot more volume, right? 8.2 targets a game compared to 6.8 targets when Green was off the field. More receiving yards, more receptions, more fantasy points. It was all good when AJ Green was on the field. So as much as I think AJ Green is an injury risk, I want him to be on the field for the fact that Tyler Boyd performs better when he's on the field. Boyd, again, is one of those long slot receivers that have so much success in today's NFL. You know, Adam Thielen, JuJu Smith-Schuster, Cooper Kupp, Michael Thomas, all the guys that are playing a lot of their snaps in the slot. And Tyler Boyd meets that criteria. And being in the slot, that gives you that volume, that floor volume, right, of 6, 7, 8 targets a game almost. And you have new head coach Zach Taylor coming in. He's from the McVay coaching tree. Do we see Boyd kind of play the Cooper Kupp role here? Or, you know, even like the Robert Woods role in this offense? Someone that plays both inside and outside. He ran 71% of his routes from the slot last year. He is a slot receiver right now, but maybe that changes with the new head coach coming in. He ranked 19th among all NFL wide receivers in air yards. So yes, he is a slot receiver, and he's going to see a lot of easy targets, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't get enough downfield targets, right? 19th in air yards is pretty good. 16th in yards after catch, so he makes plays after the catch. 54% contested catch rate, which is, you know, surprisingly actually good compared to a lot of other wide receivers in the NFL. He has very strong hands. His target quality rating per player profiler was 67th among all NFL wide receivers. So he wasn't getting quality targets and still produced at a high level. 8th in the NFL in terms of QB rating when targeted. The guy is just good. The guy is just good. And I think he's in a better position than a lot of people realize. I think he's a phenomenal wide receiver 3. Or a flex play, because he's someone you can get in like the 7th round after you probably grabbed 2 or 3 wide receivers, 2 or 3 running backs, and a tight end. And then having Boyd as like your second flex or your wide receiver 3 is amazing because, like I said, not only does he give you the floor, but guys, these are individual game lines that he had last year. 6 for 91 and a touchdown, 6 for 132 and a touchdown, 11 for 100 yards, 9 for 138 and a touchdown, 7 for 85 and a touchdown. This guy has a legit high weekly ceiling. He has as many games of at least 17 half PPR fantasy points as JuJu did last year. And he had more of those games than Robert Woods, Keenan Allen, Kenny Golladay, Julian Edelman, T.Y. Hilton, and Tyler Lockett last year. You think of Boyd as just a slot receiver with a good floor, but he's actually almost the opposite. He's like a deep slot receiver with a high ceiling on a weekly basis. Tyler Boyd in the 6th or 7th is an easy smash, easy cop for me. So those are my top 20 wide receiver rankings. I hope you guys got a lot of value out of this. I'm sorry if I was just like fucking all over the place, as I always am. Let me know what you think down below. Let me know about those questions that I asked you throughout. I literally already forgot, so I have no idea what I'm even telling you to comment on. But while you're down there, hit that thumbs up button if you enjoyed the video. If you're on the podcast, a rating and review would be very much appreciated. I'd love you a whole lot for that. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Make sure you check out teamstake.com. Have your league buy in there. It is so easy. You don't have to worry about running around collecting cash or PayPal, Venmo, whatever. It's stored in there, safely secure. We'll pay out however customizabilities-wise you want. It's a beautiful thing, and that's it for today. I'll see y'all on tomorrow's Fade the Public episode. Peace.